The neon sign of the Dusty Rose Saloon flickered against the Texas twilight, casting pink shadows across the gravel parking lot. Inside, the Friday night crowd roared with laughter and the clink of beer bottles, but Maya Chen sat alone at the corner booth, her finger tracing the rim of her untouched drink. She'd driven 3 hours from Austin to this small town, following a trail of memories she wasn't sure she wanted to find. Across the room, she spotted him immediately. Jake Maverick Sullivan, the man whose smile had once made her feel like the only woman in the world. He stood by the pool table, his weathered cowboy hat tilted just so, his laugh carrying over the country music pouring from the jukebox. He looked exactly the same, tall, rugged, with those impossibly blue eyes that had once promised her everything. Maya had been 23 when they met at a rodeo 5 years ago. She was fresh out of college, working as a physical therapist, and he was the rising star bull rider everyone talked about. Their romance had been a wildfire, intense, consuming, impossible to control. For 6 months, she'd followed him from town to town, believing in a future he painted with pretty words under starlit skies. Then came the accident that changed everything. The bull named Tornado had lived up to its name, throwing Jake so violently that the entire arena had fallen silent. Maya had run to him, her heart in her throat, pushing through the paramedics to hold his hand. The injuries were severe, a shattered pelvis, broken ribs, internal bleeding. But it was the spinal injury that rewrote their story. The doctors said he might never walk again. For 3 months, Maya never left his side. She adjusted her entire life, taking a leave from work, sleeping in hospital chairs, learning everything she could about spinal cord injuries. She pushed him through painful physical therapy sessions, held him when he cried in frustration, and reminded him daily that he was more than his ability to ride bulls. But Jake saw something different in the mirror. He saw a broken man, a burden, someone who could no longer be the fearless cowboy he'd built his identity around. And one autumn morning, when the leaves were turning gold outside his hospital window, he told her to leave. "You didn't sign up for this," he'd said, his voice hollow. "You deserve someone whole, Maya. Someone who can dance with you, take you hiking, give you the life you dreamed about." "I signed up for you," she'd argued, tears streaming down her face. "Not for what you can do, but for who you are." But Jake was resolute, his jaw set in that stubborn way she knew too well. "If you really love me, you'll let me do this with dignity. I need to figure out who I am now, and I can't do that with you watching me fail." She'd left that day, her heart shattered into pieces she wasn't sure she could ever put back together. In the months that followed, she threw herself into her work, helping other patients rebuild their lives while her own remained in fragments. She heard through mutual friends that Jake had moved back to his hometown, that he was doing okay, but the details were always vague. Now, standing in this saloon 5 years later, Maya questioned everything that had brought her here. She'd received a text from an unknown number 3 days ago, "Jake's competing at the Dusty Rose next Friday. Thought you should know." A friend. Competing? The word had sent shockwaves through her system. She'd spent hours researching, finally discovering that Jake had become involved in adaptive rodeo sports, events modified for riders with disabilities. The bull riding had been replaced with other competitions, but he was back in the arena, back in the world he loved. She'd told herself she was coming for closure, to see that he was all right and finally move on. But as she watched him now, surrounded by friends, looking happy and whole in a way she hadn't seen even before the accident, Maya realized she'd come for something else entirely. She was about to stand, about to leave before he spotted her, when his eyes found hers across the crowded room. Time seemed to stop. The noise faded. For a moment, they were just two people who had once loved each other beyond reason, now strangers separated by years and unspoken words. Jake's face cycled through emotions, shock, confusion, something that might have been joy, then a careful mask of neutrality. He said something to his friends and began making his way toward her, moving with a slight limp but with a confidence that made Maya's breath catch. He'd learned to walk again. Of course he had. Jake Sullivan had never known how to give up on anything except her. Maya. Her name on his lips was a question, an accusation, a prayer. Hi, Jake. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. I heard you were competing tonight. I wanted to see it. He slid into the booth across from her, removing his hat and setting it on the worn wood table between them like a barrier. Up close, she could see the new lines around his eyes, the silvering at his temples, the way his shoulders carried a weight that hadn't been there before. How did you find out? He asked, his voice carefully neutral. Someone texted me. I don't know who. Jake nodded slowly, his fingers drumming against the table in a nervous rhythm she remembered well. And you drove all the way from, where are you now? Still Austin. I have my own practice now. Specializing in sports injuries and rehabilitation. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Of course you do. You were always brilliant at what you did. The compliment hung in the air between them, weighted with everything they weren't saying. Maya took a breath, deciding to jump into the deep end. Why did you really push me away, Jake? And please, for once, tell me the truth. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, she thought he might deflect, might give her the same lines he'd given her 5 years ago. But then something shifted in his expression, a crumbling of the walls he'd built. Because I was terrified, he admitted, his voice rough. Terrified that when you looked at me, all you saw was what I couldn't do anymore. That every time you helped me, you were remembering the man I used to be and mourning him. I couldn't stand the thought of becoming your patient instead of your partner, your project instead of your person. Maya felt tears burning behind her eyes. Did you ever ask me what I saw when I looked at you? I was afraid of the answer. You were a coward, she said, the words coming out sharper than intended. She watched him flinch but pressed on. Not because of the accident, not because you couldn't ride bulls anymore. You were a coward because you didn't trust me, didn't trust us. You made a decision about what I could or couldn't handle without giving me a choice. Jake's eyes glistened in the dim saloon light. You're right. I was. I thought I was protecting you, but really, I was protecting myself. From the possibility that you might stay out of pity, or obligation, or some misguided sense of duty to the man I used to be. I stayed because I loved you, Maya said, her voice breaking. Not the bull rider, not the fearless cowboy everyone else saw. I loved the man who cried watching sappy commercials, who called his mother every Sunday, who read poetry when he thought no one was watching. I loved your heart, Jake, and that never changed, not even when everything else did. The silence that followed was broken by the opening notes of a slow country ballad drifting from the jukebox. Around them, couples moved to the dance floor, but Maya and Jake remained locked in their bubble of painful honesty. I think about that day every single day, Jake finally said. Sending you away was the hardest thing I've ever done, harder than any physical therapy, harder than learning to walk again, harder than accepting that my life had changed forever. And for years, I told myself it was the right choice, the noble choice. And now? Maya whispered. Now I think I was just scared. Scared that if you really saw me, saw the anger, the frustration, the man who wasn't sure he wanted to keep fighting, you'd leave anyway. So I pushed you away first, before you could decide I wasn't worth the trouble. Maya reached across the table, her hand covering his. The touch sent electricity through both of them, a reminder of everything they'd once had. You want to know what I saw when I looked at you in that hospital, Jake? What I see right now? He nodded, unable to speak. I saw the bravest person I'd ever met. Not because you were fearless, you weren't. You were terrified and hurting and so angry at the world. But you kept showing up, kept trying, even when every cell in your body wanted to quit. I saw your strength, your resilience, your refusal to let one moment define your entire life. And I saw the man I loved more than anything, fighting his way back to himself. A tear slid down Jake's weathered cheek, and he didn't bother to wipe it away. Maya, Let me finish, she interrupted gently. You asked if I saw you or just your body. The announcer's voice crackled over the speaker system, introducing the evening's events. Maya learned that Jake would be competing in adaptive team roping, a sport that required precision, timing, and partnership. As she watched the early competitors, she was struck by the skill and athleticism on display. These weren't people limited by their disabilities, they were athletes who had found new ways to excel, to push boundaries, to prove that the human spirit couldn't be contained by physical limitations. When Jake's name was called, Maya's heart leapt into her throat. He entered the arena on horseback, sitting tall in the saddle with his rope coiled and ready. His partner, a younger man named Carlos who was missing his left leg below the knee, positioned himself at the opposite end. The coordination required was obvious, this wasn't something Jake could do alone. He had learned to trust, to depend on others, to be part of a team. The steer was released, and what happened next was poetry in motion. Jake and Carlos moved in perfect synchronization, their ropes flying through the air with practiced precision. The crowd erupted in cheers as they successfully caught the steer, their time flashing on the board. It was competitive, possibly even a winning time. But what caught Maya's attention wasn't the technical skill or the time. It was the expression on Jake's face as he rode out of the arena, pure, unfiltered joy. This was a man who had found himself again, not by returning to exactly who he was before, but by discovering who he could become. After the competition, Maya waited by the corrals, watching Jake unsaddle his horse and congratulate his competitors. The easy camaraderie among the riders was evident, they laughed and trash-talked with the comfort of people who understood each other's journeys without needing to explain. When Jake finally spotted her, he walked over with that slight limp that somehow made him even more beautiful in her eyes. So, what did you think? I think you're incredible, Maya said honestly. That was amazing, Jake. The way you and Carlos worked together. 12 months of practice, he said with a grin. Carlos is the real talent. He's been in adaptive sports since he was a teenager. He's taught me more about perseverance than anyone I've ever met. They fell into step together, walking away from the noise of the arena toward a quieter section of the property. The Texas stars were emerging overhead, countless and bright, just like the nights they used to spend stargazing during their whirlwind romance. You want to know something? Jake said, his voice quieter now. For the first 2 years after the accident, I barely left my house. I was angry all the time, at myself, at God, at the bull, at fate, at everything. I pushed away everyone who tried to help. My family, my friends, even my physical therapist quit because I was such a nightmare to work with. Maya smiled sadly. I can imagine. Then one day, Carlos showed up at my door. Turns out he was friends with one of my old rodeo buddies, and he'd heard I was struggling. He didn't come to give me a pep talk or tell me everything would be okay. He came to tell me I was being an idiot. He said that. His exact words were, you can spend the rest of your life mourning what you lost, or you can start discovering what you gained. But either way, stop being such a pain in everyone's ass. Jake laughed at the memory. He was about 23 years old, telling off this bitter, broken-down former bull rider twice his age. And somehow, it was exactly what I needed to hear. They reached a wooden bench overlooking a small pond, its surface reflecting the stars. They sat down, close but not quite touching, the space between them charged with possibility. Carlos dragged me to an adaptive sports meetup, Jake continued. I didn't want to go. I thought it would be depressing, a bunch of people trying to convince themselves they were okay when they weren't. But I was so wrong, Maya. These people, they weren't trying to go back to who they were before. They were creating entirely new versions of themselves, finding strength in places they never knew existed. That's when you started team roping. That's when I started living again, he corrected. The roping came later, but the real change was learning that my worth wasn't tied to what my body could do. It was tied to who I chose to be, how I treated people, what I contributed to the world. All those things I always had, even when I was too blind to see them. Maya felt tears rolling down her cheeks, but they weren't sad tears. They were tears of recognition, of understanding, of witnessing someone's transformation from pain into purpose. I started volunteering, Jake said, working with newly injured folks, especially young guys who reminded me of myself. I learned to listen more than I talked. I went back to school online, got certified as a peer support specialist. I built a life that wasn't about proving I could do what I did before, but about discovering what I could do now. That's beautiful, Jake, Maya whispered. He turned to face her fully, taking both her hands in his. But here's the thing, Maya. Through all of it, through every breakthrough and setback, through learning to walk again and finding new dreams and building this new life, through all of it, there was this hole. This U-shaped hole that nothing could fill. Maya's breath caught. I dated other people, he admitted. Tried to move on, told myself that chapter was closed. But no one else was you. No one else challenged me the way you did, saw through my bullshit, made me want to be better just by existing. And I realized something that terrified me. What? She managed to ask. That I didn't just lose you because of the accident. I lost you because I didn't have the courage to believe that someone could love all of me, the broken parts, the angry parts, the scared parts. I thought love was about being perfect, being strong, being the hero. But real love is about being real. And I wasn't real with you. I was so busy trying to protect you from my reality that I never gave you the chance to choose it. The stars overhead seemed to pulse with light, the universe holding its breath as Maya processed his words. 5 years of pain, of wondering, of what-ifs suddenly crystallized into this single moment of clarity. When you asked earlier if I saw you or just your body, Maya said slowly, you were really asking if I could love the whole truth of you. The part that's strong and the part that's vulnerable. The part that succeeds and the part that struggles. The part that's healed and the part that's still healing. Jake nodded, his blue eyes locked on hers. The answer is yes, she said firmly. I see you, Jake Sullivan. All of you. And I love what I see, not in spite of your journey, but because of it. Because you took your pain and turned it into purpose. Because you learned that asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom. Because you're brave enough now to be honest about your fears instead of running from them. Maya, his voice broke on her name. But I need to know something, she continued, her own voice shaking. Are you ready? Really ready? Because I can't go through losing you again. If we do this, if we try again, I need you to promise that you'll talk to me when things get hard. That you'll let me in instead of pushing me away. That you'll trust me to know my own heart and make my own choices about what I can handle. Jake stood, pulling her up with him. In the starlight, his face was open, vulnerable, beautiful. I promise. God, Maya, I promise. I'm not the same man who sent you away. I've learned that loving someone means trusting them with your worst moments, not just your best ones. It means being a team, like Carlos and me in that arena. It means communication, honesty, and the courage to be imperfect together. And if there are hard days? Because there will be hard days. Then we face them together, he said without hesitation. You don't have to fix me or save me, Maya. I've done that work. But I want to build a life with you. Not the life we planned 5 years ago, but something even better, a life built on truth and resilience and the kind of love that doesn't quit when things get complicated. Maya laughed through her tears. You know, I came here tonight thinking I needed closure. I thought seeing you happy would help me finally move on. And instead, I found a beginning. She reached up, touching his face, feeling the rug.